The moment Maya saw the scar above his left eyebrow, she knew there was a story buried beneath those guarded eyes. But what she didn't know was that falling for someone who had locked away his heart would become the most beautiful and devastating journey of her life. He sat alone at the corner table of the coffee shop every morning, a fortress of silence in a world full of noise, and she became foolish enough to believe she could be the one to make him feel. Again, if you believe in second chances, and the power of love to heal even the most broken hearts, then this story is for you. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring more stories that touch the soul. Maya had always been the kind of person who saw light in everything. She collected moments like other people collected photographs, storing away the feeling of rain on her skin, the sound of laughter echoing through empty streets, the way sunrise painted the world gold. Her friends called her a hopeless romantic, and she wore that label like a badge of honor. Love, to her, was the most powerful force in the universe, the thing that made life worth living. So when she first noticed Ethan sitting alone day after day, something in her chest pulled tight, as if her heart recognized something in him that her mind couldn't yet name. She started going to the coffee shop at the same time every morning, positioning herself where she could steal glances at him without being obvious. He was beautiful in a broken way, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed to hold entire storms within them. He never smiled. He never looked up from his laptop except to take mechanical sips of black coffee. He existed in that space like a ghost among the living, present but not really there. And Maya, against all reason and self-preservation, felt herself being drawn to him like a moth to a flame that might very well burn her alive. It took her 3 weeks to gather the courage to speak to him. She walked over with her heart hammering against her ribs, holding 2 cups of coffee, and asked if she could join him. The look he gave her was cold, distant, but not cruel. He shrugged, which she took as permission, and that's how it began. That first conversation was painful in its awkwardness. He answered her question with single words, never asked anything in return, and made it abundantly clear that he hadn't asked for company. But Maya saw something flicker in his eyes when she talked about her work at the children's hospital, a brief crack in the armor, and that was enough to make her come back the next day. She learned his name slowly, piece by piece. If he was rationing out parts of himself, Ethan worked as a software engineer, lived alone, had no family he spoke to, and seemed to have built his entire life around avoiding connection. When she asked him about relationships, he looked at her with something close to pity and said that love was just a chemical reaction people mistook for meaning. It was biology, he explained in that flat, emotionless voice. Nothing more than evolution's trick to ensure reproduction. There was no magic, no destiny, no soulmates, just neurons firing and hormones flooding the system, creating the illusion of something profound. Maya's heart broke a little, hearing him speak that way, as if he had systematically dismantled every beautiful thing about human connection and reduced it to cold science. But she didn't stop coming. Something deep inside her refused to accept that this was all he was, that this shell of a person was the complete picture. She started bringing him pastries, leaving little notes with coffee-stained corners, sharing stories about her patients at the hospital, the children who fought through pain with smiles on their faces, the families who held each other through impossible odds. She told him about her grandmother, who had been married for 60 years and still looked at her husband like he hung the moon. She described the way her best friend had cried tears of joy at her wedding, the way love had transformed her from someone scared and uncertain into someone brave and whole. And Ethan listened, though he never seemed moved, never seemed to believe. Weeks turned into months, and Maya found herself thinking about him constantly. She would catch herself smiling at random moments throughout the day, remembering something he had said, or the rare occasions when his lips would almost curve into something resembling a smile. Her friends warned her that she was setting herself up for heartbreak, that you couldn't fix someone who didn't want to be fixed, that loving someone who didn't believe in love was like trying to fill a cup that had no bottom. But Maya couldn't help herself. She had fallen deeply and completely for this man who treated emotions like enemies and kept his heart locked behind walls so high she couldn't see the top. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday in October. Maya arrived at the coffee shop drenched and shivering, and for the first time, Ethan looked at her with something other than indifference. He offered her his jacket, and when their fingers touched, something electric passed between them. She saw his expression change, saw fear flash across his face, and in that moment, she understood he wasn't incapable of feeling. He was terrified of it. She asked him, quietly, gently, what had happened to make him this way. And finally, after months of carefully constructed walls, he told her her name had been Sarah, they had been together for 5 years, engaged, planning a life, and she had been everything to him he had believed, in love with the kind of certainty that only the innocent possess, the kind of faith that makes you vulnerable to complete destruction. They were supposed to get married in the spring, and then one February morning, was gone. A drunk driver ran a red light, and in the space of a heartbeat, his entire world ended. He had held her hand in the hospital as machines beeped around them, as doctors spoke in hushed tones. And he had felt love turn from the most beautiful thing he'd ever known into the most excruciating pain imaginable. When she died, something in him died. Too, he decided then that love wasn't worth it, that opening yourself up to another person was just inviting devastation, that it was safer to feel nothing than to risk feeling everything and losing it. Maya sat there with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding the depth of his wounds. She reached across the table and took his hand. And he didn't pull away. She told him that she was sorry, that she couldn't imagine that kind of pain, but that Sarah wouldn't have wanted him to stop living. She spoke about how love wasn't about avoiding loss, but about having the courage to connect, despite knowing that everything ends eventually. She told him that closing himself off wasn't protecting him. It was just a different kind of death, a slower one, where he watched life happen around him without ever really participating, and that she did something brave and foolish and completely terrifying. She told him that she had fallen in love with him, with all his broken pieces and sharp edges, and that she wasn't asking him to love her back, but she was asking him to try to believe again. Ethan stared at her for a long moment, and Maya watched. Emotions wore across his face, fear and longing and anger and something that might have been hope. He pulled his hand away and stood up, and her heart shattered. Certain he was walking away for her, but then he turned back, and there were tears in his eyes, the first she had ever seen from him. He told her he was scared, that he didn't know if he could do this, that he had spent so long building walls that he wanted. Sure, he remembered how to tear them down, but he wanted to try for her, for himself, for the memory of someone who had once loved him enough to make him believe in magic. He wanted to try. The transformation wasn't instant or easy. Healing never is. There were days when Ethan retreated back into himself, when old fears consumed him, and he pushed Maya away. There were nights when she questioned whether she was strong enough to love someone who was still learning how to be loved, but there were also moments of breakthrough, times when he would share a memory without flinching, when he would laugh at something she said, when he would reach for her hand first instead of waiting for her to bridge the gap he started talking about. Sarah, without the conversation ending in silence, remembering her wit, love instead of just grief. He began to understand that honoring her memory didn't mean shutting out the possibility of feeling again. That love wasn't a betrayal, but a testament to the capacity of the human heart to keep beating even after it's been broken. 6 months after that rainy Tuesday, Ethan took Maya to the coffee shop where they first met. He sat across from her at that same corner table, and this time his eyes were clear, present, alive. He told her that she had been right, that love wasn't just chemistry and biology, that it was the most powerful and terrifying and beautiful force he had ever known. He said that falling for her had taught him that the heart is capable of holding both grief and joy, that you can honor what you've lost while still being brave enough to reach for what's in front of you. He thanked her for not giving up on him, for seeing something worth saving when he had convinced himself there was nothing left. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever loved someone who was broken, or if you've ever been that broken person learning to heal, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment. Tell us about your own journey with love, about the people who refused to give up on you, or about the courage it took to believe again. Your stories matter, and sharing them helps create a community of hope and healing. Maya learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone that they deserve to be loved. Ethan learned that closing yourself off doesn't protect you from pain, it just ensures you'll face it alone. Together, they discovered that love isn't about perfection or certainty or guarantees. It's about showing up day after day for someone who might not know how to show up for themselves yet. It's about believing in second chances and new beginnings, about understanding that broken things can heal, and that the cracks are where the light gets in. Their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was messy and complicated and required more courage than either of them knew they possessed, but it was real, and it was theirs. And in the end, that was more than enough, because love isn't about finding someone who's never been broken. It's about finding someone worth healing for, and being someone worth healing for in return. And sometimes the person who doesn't believe in love just needs someone who believes in them enough to prove that love is real after all.